Good morning. It's Thursday, May 21st. I believe, Mr. Krikorian, this is your fourth budget that you've helped put together for the great city of Los Angeles. This is a special meeting. Today's matters will pertain to budget. I think with that said, I will kick it over to the chair, and let's get rolling. Mr. Krikorian, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Oh, wait a minute. I've been informed. I'm so excited that it's budget day that the city attorney is, in his own way, saying, don't you think it's a good idea to call the roll? And I said, you know what? You could be right. So for once, he is correct. Mr. Clerk, please call the roll.
Blumenfield, Bonabusca, Sodillo, Engler, Fuentes, Huizar, Correz, Krikorian, LeBons, Martinez, O'Farrell, Parks, Price, Wesson, 10 members present and a quorum, Mr. President.
Mr. Krikorian, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. If I may, before we get started, members, like to set a little bit of context, as I frequently do. Those of you who are in the Budget and Finance Committee have heard me set this context many times, but I think it's worth remembering that just 5 years ago, this city was facing dire circumstances. And there were many people out there in the public who were even using the B word that none of us ever dared to use. But the truth is, 5 years ago, the CAO was projecting a budget deficit for the fiscal year that we're in right now of $1.1 billion. And over the course of the last 5 years, through the work of this council and the mayor and our entire budget team in the CLA and CAO's office and throughout our departments, through diligent work year after year, we've chipped away and chipped away at that deficit. We've implemented cost savings. We've had reduction in the workforce to the point that we are now the smallest workforce that we've had since Tom Bradley was mayor. We've implemented pension reform. We've done a number of smart moves in collaboration with our labor partners that have saved this city hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. And as a result, that $1.1 billion was whittled away in this fiscal year to $165 million, an over 85% reduction in the structural deficit that the city faced. This year, we've put before you a budget that is now balanced. We have zero deficit in the coming fiscal year, although we will be facing continuing challenges over the next 3 years with projections maintained as they are. We will face future deficits over the next 3 years. So while there's much good news in this, there's also reason to continue to be conservative, continue to be careful about what we do in our budget, because we do have deficit that we have to deal with in those future years. Now, we're better situated, much better situated to deal with those challenges than we've ever been. We now have the strongest reserve in the history of the city, at least in the modern history of the city. So the budget that's before you includes a reserve of $313 million, 5.8% of the general fund, well above what our financial policies expect. In addition, we have $91.9 million in the Budget Stabilization Fund to provide additional certainty that we'll be able to ride out the difficult times that inevitably will come again. So, and then in addition, in our capital improvement expenditure program, where we're expected to have 1% of the general fund, we have almost 1.4%, $74.7 million in this budget for capital improvements. So so we're much better situated than we were, and I want to thank everybody in this horseshoe and everybody behind the scenes for helping us to get there. And we'll go into more depth into who contributed to that later. But let me just give you a few broad strokes about what's in the budget before you, and then I'm going to turn it over to our CLA to walk us through on a page-by-page basis. The mayor's proposed budget, as it's proposed to be amended by the recommendations of the Budget and Finance Committee, includes funding for 2,400 lane miles of pavement preservation, enough funding for 350,000 potholes, $20 million set aside for sidewalk repairs, and as you all know, we've made the commitment of $31 million over the course of the next 30 years to ensure that we fix sidewalks throughout this city. $6.5 million in this budget for tree trimming, increasing the budget by 50% over what was spent last year. It's enough to trim 57,000 trees. And $9 million set aside for the Clean Streets program to clean up alleys and otherwise deal with blight in the city. In public safety, we've increased funding for the LA Fire Department, I think a high priority and probably the top priority for most of us. We've increased funding for the fire department by $55 million. We're hiring 270 new firefighters for the fire department. First time we've grown the size or added firefighters in many, many years. We have 5 new classes budgeted. For the police department, we preserve current staffing levels, sworn staffing levels at LAPD. We're paying down $70 million in police overtime, an important step in trying to get us back into a more sustainable way of paying for our overtime. We're providing for 150 new black and white vehicles and 150 new motorcycles, and setting aside $4.5 million for LAPD body cameras. We've heard from many people in the public about some of the social service programs that have been funded in part by CDBG funding over the years. I'm very pleased that the recommendations before you include restored funding for many of those very critical services, over $1 million for domestic violence shelters, $750,000 for day laborer sites, $590,000 for AIDS programs restoration, $531,000 for aging department health programs restorations, almost $1 million, $900,000 for youth programs, $1 million for city-run family source centers, and $820,000 for nonprofit-run family source centers. Almost $700,000 for graffiti removal, $750,000 for clean and green, and $180,000 for the LA River Corps. $1 million in funding for critical fire safety equipment, $850,000 for improved technology, and importantly, we're spending $500,000 to bring down the backlog of LAPD fingerprinting, which has been going on for much too long. So with that, members, we're prepared to consider the recommendations before you. And just so you all remember the process, we have before us the mayor's budget and the Budget and Finance Committee's recommendations for changes to that budget. So what we're going to be discussing right now is that committee report, which includes all of the changes to the mayor's budget. If it's not dealt with in this report, then the mayor's budget stands. Any changes to the mayor's budget have to be included in the action that we're taking today. So that's what we're going to be going through with our CLA right now. And what we'll do is you have before you this report, the Budget and Finance Committee's report. We're going to start on the global recommendations that you see on attachment 1, and we'll just go through that page by page. And you've all had a chance to review it now. If there's any matters that you want to call special on that page, we will. If not, we'll just move on to the next page. Does that work for the CLA?
That works fine.
Okay. Now, with regard to motions, thank you to all of you who have already submitted motions. And if you haven't, please do so, because we're going to have to vote on all those motions today as well. They're either going to be referred to committee or we're going to vote on them today, or they're not going to happen. So if you don't have your motions in, We don't want to delay the conclusion of this hearing and approval of the budget waiting for motions. So please go ahead and get it in. So let me see if there's anything else I need to let you know about. Oh, any motion that, as I mentioned yesterday, any motion that has a budgetary impact on the general fund, any motion that adds positions, funded or unfunded, I will ask the council president to refer back to the Budget and Finance Committee for further consideration. So any motions that will be considered today are those that don't add positions and don't have a budgetary impact. So with that, I'm ready to turn it over to our CLA, Sharon So, and Karen Kalfine.
Good morning, Mr. President and members. As Mr. Krikorian said, we'll be...
You know what? Why don't, if it's okay with you, Mr. Krikorian, and we'll go through all of the presentations, but shouldn't we go through the report or the sheet now, and then once we have identified all of the items for conversations, begin with the table, or how would you like to? You just want her to start with the reports and then?
I wanted to invite them to go ahead and give whatever overview they'd like, both in terms of
Okay.
substance and in process, and then we'll go ahead and
So I'm
follow.
sorry for the interruption.
No problem. Maybe just to frame this a little bit, what we will do today is begin with the recommendations that are in the report. The committee report before you today is in 3 sections. The first section summarizes the committee hearings. The second section, which is the attachment, begin the recommendations to modify the proposed budget. And the third section are a list of reports that the committee members had requested. So what we can do is go through page by page. I can read off the recommendations on that page. If council members have items that they want to call special, we can note those like we do on any other agenda. Take a vote on that page. When we've gone through the entire report, we can come back on those items that have been called special. And then at the last group, which are the reports, those can be taken up as one item rather than going through those individually. So if that works for the president, we can proceed.
Let's do this. Let's do the report backs. Let's vote on them now. That would be items 1 through 67.
Correct.
So on that, on those issues, let's open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
14 ayes.
Okay, now we'll start going page through per page,
Yes.
and you can do that or I. However,
Whatever you like. If you like, I can read off the recommendations, and then we can just go from there.
let's do that.
Okay. So beginning on page 1 of attachment 1, beginning with the global recommendations, page 1 has recommendations 1 through 4.
Okay, members, let's vote on that. Let's open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
14 ayes.
Let's continue.
Okay, on page 2, these are recommendations 5 through 9.
All right, we're on page 2. Let's open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
14 ayes.
Continue.
Page 3, recommendations 10 through 12.
Let's open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
14 ayes.
On page 4, recommendations 13 through 22.
Okay, specials. Let's then open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
14 ayes.
Okay, on page 5, recommendations 23 through 28B.
Okay, member specials. Do not see any. Let's vote on those items. Let's open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
14 ayes.
All right.
Next.
On page 6, recommendations 28C and D.
Okay, no specials. Let's open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
14 ayes.
On page 7, continues recommendations D, 4 through 31.
Specials. Let's open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
14 eyes.
On page 8, recommendations 32 through 37C.
Okay, members, any specials? So open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
14 eyes.
Continue.
On page 9, recommendations 37D through 46.
Specials. Let's open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
14 eyes.
Page 10, recommendations 47 through 55.
Okay, no specials. Let's open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
14 eyes.
Page 11, recommendations 56 through 63.
Page 11, no special. Mr. Weezar,
Mr. President, item 58, special, please.
why don't we hold item 58? Any other specials? Okay, let's vote on the remaining. Let's open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
14 eyes.
Continue.
Page 12, recommendations 64 through 70.
Page 12, 64 through 70. Let's open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
14 eyes.
Page 13, recommendations 71 through 78.
Members, let's prepare to vote on that item. Let's open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
14 eyes.
Let's move on. Karen?
Page 14, recommendations 79 through 85.
Okay, members, no specials. Let's open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
14
Next.
eyes.
Sorry, next.
Page 15, recommendations 86 through 91.
All right, no specials. Let's open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
14 eyes.
Page 16, recommendations 92 and 93.
Mr. O'Farrell,
President, I'd like to call item 93 special.
per Mr. O'Farrell, 93. Okay, let's prepare to vote on the remaining items. Let's open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
14 eyes.
Page 17, recommendations 94 through 97.
94, Mr. Bloomingfield.
I'd like to call 94 special, please.
94, called by Mr. Bloomingfield. Let us prepare to vote on the remaining items. Let's open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
14 eyes.
On page 18, recommendations 98 through 101.
Mr. Weezar,
Please.
101. Mr. Weezar. Let's vote on the remaining. Let's open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
14 eyes.
Continue.
On page 19, beginning with Exhibit H, recommendations 102A through E.
Okay, let's vote on page 19. Let's open the roll, close the roll, and tabulate the vote.
14 eyes.
On page 20, recommendations 102F through K.
Okay, let's prepare to vote on that item as well. Let's open the roll, close the roll, and tabulate the vote.
14 eyes.
On page 21, recommendations 102L through R.
Okay, page 21. Let's open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
14 eyes.
That moves us on to,
Page 22, recommendations 102S through Y.
okay, members, let's open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
14 eyes.
Continue.
And on page 23, recommendations 102Z through DD.
Specials. Well, let's move forward and vote. Let's open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
14 eyes.
On page 24, recommendations 103 through 111.
Okay, no specials. Let's open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
14 eyes.
Page 25, recommendations 112 through 119.
Specials. All right, let's open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
14 eyes.
Page 26, recommendations 120 through 126.
Members? All right, let's open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
14 eyes.
Page 27, recommendations 127 through 135.
Page 27, members. Let's then prepare. Let's open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
14 eyes.
And on page 28, recommendations 136 through 138.
Specials. Don't see any. Let's open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
14 eyes.
Okay, that concludes the recommendations in the report, so if you'd like, we go back to items called special.
Okay, and I want to remind the members, if you have motions, to please get them in as soon as possible. So, Karen, let's go back to, I think, page 11, item 58.
Correct. And that was called special by
Mr.
Mr.
Huizar.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I don't have the motion right in front of me because we turned it in and don't have a copy before me, but I think what we're asking for here is, in discussions with the planning department, we've committed ourselves to the neighborhood conservation program, and we have budgeted 9 months, but we would like to have that item be budgeted for a year. It would be difficult to have someone just work on this program for 9 months as opposed to a year. So that's a very straightforward request. And if this, I understand this is going to go back to committee, correct? And, okay, thank you. I just wanted to state that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Okay, so then now we can vote on this item. Let's open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
14 eyes.
So that would bring us to page 16, item 93, Mitch O'Farrell.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to receive and file this report because the department already recognized this revenue in their budget.
Mr. Kokorian, what are your thoughts?
I'd like to ask the CLA to comment on that, please.
There would be no impact to the budget on this item. It was intended that the additional revenue would be used to do construction. So if it's already been counted in the department's budget, there would be no impact to the general fund.
Okay, and does that have any impact, Mr. Santana, would that have any impact on our year-end FSR, or?
No.
Okay, then I think we can address that now if it doesn't have a budgetary impact, Mr. President. So I would have no objection to voting on that now.
Okay, let's open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
14 eyes.
Brings us to page 17, item 94, Mr. Bloomingfield.
Thank you. And I know that we're working with the CLA right now on getting the written language, but this is the item, colleagues, that has to do with Channel 36. And, you know, I've been chair of the Innovation General Services Committee for 2 years and on the Budget Committee. And frankly, during that time, it's not been clearly demonstrated to me what the city is actually receiving in exchange for the $250,000 that we spend every year on this. And so I haven't really been going to make a big deal out of it in terms of it came up the last 7 years. The mayor's office has always not included funding for this. and the council has come in and funded it afterwards. This year, through the budget process, the mayor's office, again, did not include any funding for it. We didn't hear from the nonprofit group that does Channel 36 during the budget process, and we didn't include funding for it. I didn't lose any sleep over that. Yesterday, we had, for the first time for me in my office, we've been contacted by the nonprofit that deals with Channel 36, and I know they came and spoke, and they spoke to a number of members, and some of the members have contacted me about this. So the question is, do we want to fund them partially? And technically, this is not a general fund item because there is an AT&T settlement, and we could take funding out of that settlement, and it would not impact directly, technically, the general fund. But make no mistake about it, it does impact the general fund down the road, because if we don't take this action, that money next year would revert to the general fund, and that would be money we could spend on police, fire, services, or something else. So I have mixed feelings about this, but when we lost public access because of some actions by the state, not when I was there, prior to my being at the state, for the record, that was too bad. And Channel 36 was, the idea of it was to step in and kind of fill that void. It's very different. It doesn't actually provide, the studios for folks. I'm learning about it again. I haven't had very much interaction with them. So the question is, do we want to fund them in some way and look into this? Because if we don't fund it, what I've learned in this last 24 hours is that we lose that Channel 36 potentially forever in terms of having that ability to go back and have it. Now, a lot of this, one could argue of what they're doing is podcasts, YouTube, and technology has taken over. So the proposal today is the proposal I'm putting forward today is a middle ground. And I've been talking with the CLA about this and can describe it as well, which is to take a portion of the settlement money, not the entirety of it, and only a portion of what Channel 36 would need for the next year, and put it into this year's budget. And then over the next 6 months, to have some hearings in ITA, to talk about the value of Channel 36, to find out really how many people are actually watching Channel 36, what does it deliver in terms of value to the taxpayers of Los Angeles. It does have some value across the board, and other folks use it as well, and to give it a real hard analysis. But the idea is to not lose this resource, to buy us a little bit of time, to put half the funding in this budget and half the funding in the UB, so we can make that decision at a later time. It's punting this decision a little bit down the road, and in part because this really just came up, and I do say this to chide Channel 36 to some extent, they came up very much at the last minute. So I put that out there as a proposal, and that's the proposal I'm putting forward, and I would urge your aye vote for it. But it is a motion. It's going to be a written motion. CLA is working on it right now. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And do you want to add to more technically what the motion says?
So, Mr. Blumenfield, what you essentially would be doing is on item number 94A, there is $218,000 that's allocated in the telecommunications development account. What you would be proposing to do is to take half of that and depositing it into for use for Channel 36, with the other half of that $218,000 placed in the unappropriated balance. And we'll come back to you later in the year for allocation if it is the desire of the council to do that.
Right, and we would have hearings in the interim specifically about Channel 36. So that's the proposal, that's the motion.
Thank you,
As
Mr.
described.
Blumenfield. Ms. So would it be appropriate to hold that until the other motions are turned in, and then we can go through it?
We can hold it, or we can actually, you can actually take an action. We can do a verbal amendment. Since this action is already on the committee report, we can do a verbal amendment if it is a desire of the chair.
With the President, I'm happy to do a verbal, to take a vote on the verbal motion.
Okay, we can, I don't anticipate that that's a problem. Okay, let's open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
14 eyes.
So where are we now? 18 Page 18, 101.
That's correct.
Mr. Weezer.
Thank you, Mr. President. And this too will go to committee, but I just wanted to state that currently there's about $2.5 million that's scheduled to be moved from UB to contractual services to trim trees. As many of you have witnessed and probably experienced, we have had some difficulty in trimming the trees we would like throughout the city. In my case, in my district, we've had trouble with several contractors. We finally have a contractor that we would like to see, however, that's doing great work. However, I think the right mix for us to move forward is to have both in-house and contracting services, and we currently have no in-house. The motion that was submitted is asking for us to hold the money in the UB until the department comes forward with a staffing plan, and at that time determine what's the right direction to go, what's the right balance, what's the right mix. It's not committing us to move forward with any type of in-house at this time, but we need a staffing plan if it makes sense at all, and it's better for us to have a mix of crews, and that's a discussion that will take place once we send this back to committee. Thank you.
Mr. Cedillo.
Mr. President, I want to concur with my colleague. There's moments where a public-private partnership is appropriate, but we've seen that this has not served the city well. I think that we need, as a foundation, a solid base or core of the public workforce, a group that we can depend on, that's experienced, that has greater flexibility, has greater capacity. I think they've demonstrated that, and I think this is one of those moments where we have that aha reevaluation moment. Let's bring the work back into the city. I think we can accomplish more for the people of Los Angeles, and that the more appropriate balance would be to bring the workforce and bring the work back into the city of Los Angeles. And so I concur with my colleague.
Mr. Koretz.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to briefly add my voice to this also. I think over and above the fact that I would like to see most of this activity done by a city workforce, I think the contractors have realized they have us over a barrel, and they really have been ripping us off. And we need a balance to offset that issue as well. So I support my colleague, Mr. Weezer, and thank him for bringing this to our attention.
Mr. Buscaino.
Thank you, Mr. President. To respond to Mr. Weezer's concern, I appreciate that in bringing this forward. We have led an effort to look at the cost analysis side by side of using both contract work and also city work crews, and that's sitting in Mr. Santana's office right now, and hoping by the time we return back from recess, we'll hear that in Public Works. You know, colleagues, as it relates to, obviously, we want the best bang for our buck as it relates to tree trimming. And oftentimes we find that we're pricing our way out of city services. It's costly. But at the same time, of course, these contractors are taking advantage of us because our workforce is depleting. So it's a good discussion to continue to have, and looking forward to continuing this through our Public Works Committee as well. Thank you.
Mr. Bonin.
Thank you, Mr. President. I concur with Mr. Weezer's motion and with Mr. Koretz's characterization of the situation. I can tell you, just by looking at a tree, if it's been done in-house or done by a contractor. The in-house ones are done well. My neighborhoods are happy. If it's done by a contractor, they look bad, the trees are injured, and the neighborhood is extremely unhappy. Contracting out on tree trimming has been a failed experiment in privatization for us. It may save us some money, but we're getting what we paid for, and actually we're getting even less. There's a reason it costs less, is because we're getting a really, really shoddy job. To the extent that we maintain a balance, and we're going to continue after this discussion to have some outside contracting. I think it should be as small as we can possibly do. It's really important that the city department have the resources to supervise and do quality assurance of the outside contractors, because for a while, a couple of years ago, that wasn't really happening, and that made the problem with the shoddy outside work even worse. So happy to support Mr. Weezer.
Mr. Parks.
Thank you very much. I have a different opinion. We've had great success with the tree trimming since it's gone to vendor. I don't think we have to go back but about 4 or 5 years when we were not cutting any trees and realize that that was totally under the purview of the city resources. And I think that we can control cost on the outside by the RFP process and by managing the contracts. The last thing I think when Mr. Krikorian talked about our budget today, and we've kind of moved past the issue of deficits and bankruptcy, is because we've taken the number one cost off, a lot of the number one cost off the budget, which is overhead, pension, medical, and the fact if you hire people, that's what you're going back to. I think the lessons we learned over the last 5 years is to look at places that we can go outside and get the best services, but yet we have to manage them. We just can't throw it out there and say private industry is just going to let us ride. We have to look at it, manage it, just as we've added certain concerns that when people do our medians, that they tear up the flowers. We're asking them now in new RFPs to replace the flowers. These are things that I think we have to manage on a day-to-day basis. But I can remember a very short time ago, we were cutting no trees under the city personnel processes because the constant answer was we have personnel, but we don't have enough personnel to cut the trees. So we've only begun to cut, started I think initially with 4,000 or 5,000. Now we're talking about upwards of how many, Mr. Krikorian, did you mention? How many trees? Whatever, thousands of trees now. But I think we need to really be balanced and not look at it just moving it back in the city, because that is, in my judgment, not the answer when we think about, is our goal to cut trees or is our goal to hire city employees? And I think the issue should be being able to cut trees.
Mr. Council
okay.
President, if I could add something.
Yes, go right ahead.
As Mr. Buscaino indicated, my office is currently preparing an analysis with street services to determine both the most cost-effective way of restoring this service, as well as determining what the appropriate balance would be between in-house staff and contract staff. We expect that report to be issued sometime this summer. It's important to point out that what's before you is in addition to it's already in the base budget. And so pursuant to Mr. Weezar's motion, if that were to pass, then the work would continue with what's in the base budget. The additional amount that's being proposed would be put aside until our report is issued and your council acts.
Thank you. Mr. Krikorian.
Thank you, Mr. President. 57,000 trees, Mr. Parks, and that's not nearly enough. We need to do much, much more. And to that point, I very much welcome Mr. Weezar's motion and the continuing discussion that we'll have around the CAO's report. I think a couple of thoughts on this. One is that cost is not the only issue with tree trimming, because this is a long-term part of our city. And contractors who come in and do it on the cheap have an interest in completing the job and moving on, but that tree is going to remain there for 50 years or 75 years. And our city crews have an interest in making sure that that tree continues to be healthy over the long term, continues to look good, continues to not have adverse impacts on our sidewalks and the rest of our infrastructure. Our urban forestry professionals understand that what they do now will have an impact in 10 and 15 years, and they care about that. So that's an important factor, I think, to take into account. And on cost, there are going to be times when I think that we'll want to take advantage of contractors as well as our urban forestry professionals, but in calculating whether or not that realizes a savings, we have to also take into account the requirement of supervision of those contractors, which we have not done in the past. So to compare apples to apples, we want to make sure that if you're hiring a contractor, you also have sufficient professional staff on the city to supervise and inspect the work of those contractors, and that has to be figured into the cost as well. So with that, Mr. President, we welcome taking up Mr. Weezar's motion in committee and continuing to work on the this balance issue that's going to be captured in Mr. Santana's report.
Okay, so what is the vote as amended?
To receive and file.
Oh, okay. So then let's open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
14 eyes.
Okay, members, why don't we look at 1045? Any motions that you want to submit, why don't we have them in by 1045? And so I think at this point, why don't we look at a recess for about 15 minutes or so? Mr. Wizar.
Yeah, I just need a point of clarification. On the last item, to receive and file means that it ended here. Shouldn't the motion be to send to committee and vote on that?
The receive and file would essentially leave the $2.5 million in the unappropriated balance. It could not be spent until it comes back to council.
Okay, so okay, that's fine. Thank you.
All right.
What time is it?
Members, if you have motions, please submit those motions. If you have motions, please submit the motions. We'll be starting in a very few minutes. We are still in recess. Okay, folks, we're live. I'm at this point, Mr. Krikorian, we have our first packet is ready. Items 1 through 9. Would you like to begin? Items 1 through 9. I think we'll have a few more packets come up. They're being worked on right now.
Mr. President, so we have 2 packets on the desk right now, items number 1 through 9 and items number 10 through 21. There is a third packet that is being distributed momentarily, and that will be the total number of motions that will be passed out.
Okay, you want to just start, Mr. Kukla?
So I think, Mr. President, we can go ahead and begin with these items, and by the time we're finished, we should have the next packet. So if it's your pleasure, we can just go through in numerical order, and I'll provide my requests of what should be referred to committee and what can be voted upon here, and we can proceed accordingly.
Wonderful. Then, if I could get Sharon, let us begin.
Yes, motion number 1 is an instruction to the Bureau of Street Services with the assistance of the CAO and Bureau of Engineering to develop an on-call list of pre-qualified tree trimming contractors. This is an instruction to report and no impact to the general fund.
And Mr. President, that would appear to have no impact on the general fund, and we could go ahead. I would recommend approval of the motion.
Okay, on this item, let's open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
15 ayes.
Next.
Motion number 2 is an action to add resolution authority with no funding for a service coordinator in the Bureau of Street Services to assist in responding to media and constituent requests. While this motion has no impact for next year, it would have ongoing impact in future years as it would be a general funded positions.
And consistent with what we set out at the beginning, the addition of positions, whether funded or unfunded, I would request be referred to committee.
In fact, so without objection, can I just refer that? So what's our next item? I'll refer that back to committee.
Motion number 3 would provide an additional instruction to the budget by adding a footnote by designating additional contingency in the unappropriated balance to set aside $500,000 for the implementation of the Climate Action Plan and the Cooling and Urban Heat's Impact Study and Objectives. This would have no impact to the general fund. What it would do is earmark funds within the unappropriated balance mid-year adjustment line item to set aside $500,000 for this project.
Oh.
Mr. President, while this has no net impact on the general fund, it is a appropriation within the UB that I would ask be referred to committee.
Okay, so then without objection, that'll be the order. Let's continue.
Item number 4 is a motion to instruct the Bureau of Sanitation to report on the benefits of the fiscal year 2014-15 increased frequency of Operation Healthy Streets and provide recommendations on necessary resources to achieve an optimum level. This motion is a motion to report and has no impact to the general fund.
I'd recommend approval of the motion.
Okay, let's open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
15 ayes.
Next item is
Item number 5 is a motion to instruct the fire department to report on an optimal level of staffing and equipment needed to serve the area covered by Fire Station 9 in Skid Row. This is an instruction report, no impact to the general fund.
Recommend approval of the motion, Mr. President.
Let us, Madam Clerk, open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
15 ayes.
Motion number 6 is a motion to recommend amendment to a technical change to schedule number 17 relative to the Convention Center Revenue Fund. This has no impact to the general fund.
I'd recommend approval, Mr. President.
Let's open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
15 ayes.
Motion number 7 is to add resolution authority without funding to the Bureau of Sanitation for one sanitation wastewater manager 2 and one environmental engineer to support the San Fernando Valley groundwater recharge system, advanced water purification facility, and other recycling projects. No funding is provided. It would be special fund, but there is no funding provided in the motion. No impact to the general fund.
Okay, Mr. Koretz, did you have something to say on this item?
I asked for support, but also I noticed that Mr. Fuentes has submitted a similar motion number 17, so I think we must have both been asked in passing to do this, and if we could merge the two of them, I think they're the same positions that we've asked for, and so I would ask that we get support for these together in some form.
Mr. Fuentes.
Agree, Mr. President. It'd be item number 17 that we would be merging, so long as that we include the report back on the, let's see here, the report back on prioritizing support for the San Fernando Valley groundwater recharge system.
Okay, so we're going to take 17 and merge it into 7?
Yep.
Okay.
And, Mr. President, I couldn't agree more with the importance of this particular motion, but in that it does involve additional positions, I'd ask it to be referred to.
Okay, so without objection, that'll be the order. And again, just to clarify, item 17 will be merged into item 7. And that has been referred back to committee. Ms. So, can we move on?
Yes, motion number 8 is a motion to delete for Office of Finance, delete 1 Treasury Accountant 1 and add 1 Principal Accountant 2 in the Office of Finance. This would have a slight general fund increase with a cost to be absorbed by the Office of Finance.
But the department is absorbing that cost.
Correct.
It doesn't create a net increase in the number of positions, so I'd ask that we go ahead and approve that motion.
Let's open the roll on that item.
I got a question.
Okay, Mr. Labange.
Thank you very much. Office of Finance has offices around the city. Last year, they closed the Hollywood office. Could you look and see if you could open it up at least for 3 days a week? Because small businesses have to come all the way downtown, and they love the regional city halls. So that's just what I ask for. If they're asking for more positions, I want to make sure they get out there to help the people who pay the taxes. Is that all right?
If you are asking to make an amendment to have Office of Finance to report in addition to this, yes, we can.
Yeah, sure,
amend.
whatever the technical words are.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
But Mr. Labange, if they do have to come down here, we will give them free tickets to tour the Bradley Tower. Okay? Mr. Krikorian, what is your fancy?
If that was an amendment to this motion, the motion is being referred to committee in any event, so that should be fine.
Okay, so that'll be the order.
Just for clarification, is this being referred to committee?
Yes.
This item.
Oh, actually, wait, we're on number 8.
This is the one where the cost is being absorbed by the Office of Finance.
So yes, I'm sorry. So we can vote on this as amended with the report coming
To
back.
come back. Okay,
Yes.
so we will then vote on this. Let's open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
15 ayes.
That brings us where?
Motion number 9 is, would amend the budget to add 9 months funding and resolution authority for 7 positions in the Bureau of Engineering for the Development Services Program to process B permits. This would be offset by increased revenues generated by these positions.
Mr. Krikorian?
Request that we go ahead and approve this motion.
Let's open the roll, close the roll, and tabulate the vote.
15 ayes.
Motion number 10 would amend the budget to provide 3 additional months funding for 2 city planning associates to support the Neighborhood Conservation Program. These positions were added as part of the Budget and Finance Committee action. Budget and Finance provided 9 months funding. This would add 3 months more funding. For full year funding, this would impact the general fund.
You want to refer to, so on this item, without objection, we'll refer it to committee. That brings us to what item? Motion 11?
Motion 11 would be an amendment to designate a portion of the Sewer Construction and Maintenance Fund for new sewer connection financial assistance program. This is a technical change consistent with action that the council took yesterday on this program. It would make an amendment to a change to the schedule, so this would be consistent.
So why don't we move to approve this? Let's open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
15 ayes.
Motion number 12 is an amendment to instruct Housing and Community Investment Department with the assistance of City Attorney to negotiate an extension for a contract with Prevention Services for Youth at Risk and add $90,000 in funding. This would be an impact to the general fund.
So we'll, in order to just stay in line with what we're doing, let's refer without objection this item to committee. Continue.
Motion number 13 would be an amendment to add a new line item in the Cultural Affairs Department Special 3 Appropriations to add the Northeast Jazz Festival and also to instruct Cultural Affairs Department to report with a strategy to promote more citywide festivals. There's no funding associated with this line item. It's an addition of a line item. I believe that if additional funds are provided, it would provide authority to expend for this purpose.
All right, Madam Clerk, let's prepare to vote on this item. Wait, let's hold off for a moment.
Yeah, thank you,
Please.
Mr. President. I would request that this item be reported to Arts Parks Committee.
Okay, so then without objection, we'll refer this to Arts and Parks? I'm looking to Mr. Krikorian to see what your comfort level.
I'd have no objection to, it has no impact on the budget or the general fund, so I'd have no objection to voting today. I don't, but if Mr. O'Farrell has a policy issue, then
I can elaborate.
it's not within my purview.
My apologies. I can elaborate. There will be, Cultural Affairs will be reporting on 3 grant schedules to help fund programs just like this in Arts Parks.
So there's not a reason why we couldn't vote on that and still listen to the report or concern. So,
As a part of the budget, Mr. O'Farrell, if it's helpful, I think since this is a budget instruction, we can vote on the budget instruction today and then have an understanding that the policy issue will be heard in Arts Parks. But we can go ahead and approve that today.
Mr. Cedillo, since this is
the way to
that's
proceed.
fine. Okay, Mr. Labange?
I support Mr. Cedillo.
Yes, Mr. Fuentes.
Just a question on all of this. So I've got a festival in my district, Dia de los Muertos. We're beginning it. Will this action preclude me from being able to then be able to be competitive since I have not established a budget line with Cultural Affairs?
Ask them.
Well, I'd like to hear from staff if I could.
Yeah, there they are.
So the way we understand it, there is going to be a grant program. There are funds set aside. There's a total amount set aside within Cultural Affairs.
For citywide festivals?
For citywide festivals. And so Cultural Affairs would have to come back and allocate funds accordingly based on requests. It would depend upon how many requests they get and what kind of festivals are being requested. This one would place a line item, and it's sending a message to Cultural Affairs. This is one that the council would like funded. So
I currently don't have a line item for the festival that I'd like to be more competitive with. So this action would make it so that this one is sort of primed for that, this particular jazz festival.
Yes.
Okay. And so if I want to get in on some of that action, how do I go about doing that?
So Councilman, you could bring in a motion, or you could amend this item to add a particular item in this motion to set aside funding as well, and have that deliberation occur in the Arts Committee.
So my thinking is, since there isn't any money associated with this action today, nothing precludes us from being able to establish that line item in the future, unless I'm incorrect. I think that it ought to go to committee.
There is nothing to stop you from doing that. In fact, there's nothing to stop you from doing it tomorrow during regular council to instruct or ask the Cultural Affairs Department to designate funding to the extent possible for another festival. So nothing stops you now. Nothing will stop you tomorrow either.
Go right ahead, Mr. Krikorian.
Similar motions have been brought throughout the budget year at different times. Subsequent to approval of the budget, a motion like that would be well taken and could be considered. It doesn't, in other words, it doesn't need to be considered now in order to be considered.
Yes, Mr. O'Farrell, followed by Mr. Labange.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just to add, I have a motion number 18 that addresses this further. which we'll get to.
Okay.
But I think that adds context to this whole conversation.
Okay, Mr. Labange.
Members, that you should always fight for things, get them in line, because all of a sudden there was a cloud before this cloud that is in our computers, and it gets stuck in City Hall. So unless you get a line, it's very helpful. The only thing I would suggest, Mr. President, is committee chairman, if there's anything that reflects the budget other than budget and finance, which all goes through budget and finance, have it scheduled and try to get it back within 2 weeks, because your constituents feel good when the fiscal year comes and you can say you fought and got that lined up. So my
Okay.
suggestion.
Okay, I believe the consensus is to move forward, though. I didn't see. You have several events. So let's, on this item, let's open the roll, close the roll, tabulate.
15 ayes.
Next, Ms. So.
Item number 14 is an amendment to transfer a portion of the general city purposes allocation for the Clean Streets Citywide program to a new line item in the unappropriated balance and instruct Public Works and CAO to report with an implementation plan for this program. Funds are dedicated right now in the general city purposes budget for the Clean Streets Citywide. This motion would actually move a portion of those funds to the unappropriated balance. Expenditure would require a subsequent action by the council during the budget year. And there would be no impact to the general fund.
Oh, Mr. Buscaino.
A technical amendment, Mr. President. We need to strike the Department of Public Works and replace that with, to instruct the Bureau of Sanitation and the CAO's office, CAO to report with an implementation plan for this program.
Mr. Krikorian.
You're shaking your head, Paul, so let me just be clear here. We're not changing the purpose of this. We just want more details on this program moving forward, and respectfully request to go to the policy committee, which is the Public Works.
Okay, so the funding remains will remain for Clean Streets citywide expenditure,
Yes.
but it's being placed in the UB for further consideration of policy implications that
And
are
implementation
associated.
of the program, yes, sir.
Okay.
So this refer to committee then?
I think to
Oh, you're fine?
Public Works.
Okay, so then let's open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
15 ayes.
Motion number 15 would be an amendment to add one principal recreation supervisor to oversee senior services to the Department of Recreation and Parks without funding. This would have no impact on next year's general fund. However, since Rec and Parks is funded by special funds, it would require Rec and Parks to fund it within their annual allocation.
Mr.
To
Labange.
rise for the seniors. In former times, before the great cut that we took thousands of positions out of the way, there were very catered positions for seniors in recreation and parks. And if you go into a senior center right now at this hour, it's going to be buzzing with people enjoying and engaging. But without that key person in recreation and parks, it's not as good as it once was. So it's going to go to committee, and I'm looking for all of you guys who are over 50 years old to make sure you fight for this. You're not 50 yet, Felipe? All right, so that's okay. I know.
Let's
60. Thank you.
let's leave age out of it, Mr. Labange. So, Mr. Krikorian, we'll just refer that one?
Yes, please.
Okay, refer that to committee
With
without
Mr.
objection.
Labange's strong support, we'd like to refer that matter to committee for further consideration and input from Mr. Labange.
Karen, did you get that with Mr. Labange's strong support?
And if you're not here, we're going to invite you back to come and talk about it.
Wait, let me
Just fill
move
out a
on.
card.
Let's move on. Miss, so the next item.
Yes, motion 16 would be an amendment to provide resolution authority and 9 months funding for one deputy police chief to be responsible for the oversight of traffic divisions. This would be an impact to the general fund.
Okay, Mr. Labange, just so I'll let you know what I heard earlier, that the request would be that this would be sent back to committee. Now, you can speak on it, but that's the request that was made of me earlier.
I got that every year. And if I turn to our audience, how many have been affected by crime in Los Angeles or anywhere? Raise your hand right now. 3, 4 people. How many by traffic in Los Angeles? Raise your hand if you've been affected by traffic. You're all there. Okay, the point I'm trying to make, and this is a City Hall group here, they're afraid to stand up for the police department, is that we have a very large city, and the dynamics of our police department are so important, and in the area of traffic is so key. Mobility, the changing streets, the new ideas and concepts coming from Mayor Garcetti and our Selena Reynolds, the Department of Transportation. There needs to be someone who is in charge. As I leave this building, I tell you, there's places that are missing where people used to be in charge. And you went to that one person, whoever she or he was, and things happened. So all I could say to Chief Beck and his representatives here, come to committee and let's fight to get the money to get a deputy chief, because of all the hit and runs that you talk about, all the pedestrian accidents. Often, and I'm just telling you, if it's one person at top, you're going to get a result that will be quicker and faster to serve the people better. And I ask you, is in the time when it comes back, a yes vote. All I need, I know I got 8 friends here, so I'm counting on you in the future. Thank you.
You have more than that, Mr. Labange. But on this item, let's refer this back to Budget and Finance, if we can move on.
Motion 17 was already done previously with
we
motion number 7.
condensed that one with 7, yes.
Motion 18 is an amendment to instruct Cultural Affairs to report on the grant program, special appropriation schedules 1 through 3, including grant guidelines, also an arts activation fund and the cultural community events, including a proposed guidelines and/or procedures, and also to provide recommendations to increase support for performing arts and live theater activities citywide.
Okay, so Mr. Krikorian on this would just vote on this?
We can go ahead and vote. I recommend approval of the motion.
All right, let's open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
15 ayes.
Motion number 19 would be an amendment to recognize additional revenue within the Zoo Enterprise Trust Fund. This would be for 2015-16 ticketed event revenues. This is consistent with the recently adopted memorandum of agreement with the Greater Los Angeles Area Zoo Association.
Good job on the norms.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's very exciting. That's probably,
Mr. Chair?
I'll be the happiest.
I think pending further discussion with the CAO and the CLA on the revenue front, if we can refer that to committee.
Okay, then without objection, that is the order. Continue.
Motion number 20 would be an amendment to take an existing chief urban forester position within the Bureau of Street Services and reclassify it as an assistant director, bureau head, and also to serve as the sustainability officer for the bureau. I might add that on this particular item, that the Budget and Finance Committee already added a chief management assistant position to serve as a sustainability officer. This would have an impact to the general fund at some point when when they fill this position, since no funding is provided, will be no impact next year, but there will be an impact the following year. And there's actually now 2 positions, if this is approved, for this chief sustainability officer.
Thank you. I'll defer to the chair.
It should be referred to committee, sir.
So without objection, that will be the order.
Item number 21 would be an amendment to instruct the chief legislative analyst and city administrative officer to report on the status of HUD Section 108 and community development block grant investment fund loans that require site-specific tax revenue as a repayment source. This is an instruction to report and no impact to the general fund.
Without objection? So, should we vote on this?
Yeah, I recommend approval of the motion.
Okay, so let's open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
15 ayes.
Okay, I think we have another packet.
Yes. The last package should be items number 22 and 23, and the closing motions of A and B. First, motion number 22 is a technical correction to reduce the Department of Building and Safety funding from the Systematic Code Enforcement Program by $76,000, increasing the department's funding from the general fund by $76,000, and increasing the Building and Safety's general fund revenue source code by $76,000. This is actually a net zero impact to the general fund. It is essentially changing the source of revenues to support building and safety.
Mr. Krikorian, want to just vote?
22.
22.
22. Yes, we can go ahead and
Let's open the roll.
Recommend approval of the motion.
Close the roll, tabulate the vote.
15 ayes.
Brings us to item 23.
Item 23 is a motion that would amend the budget to provide additional funding for a speed hump and blue curb program and transportation to install speed humps and blue curbs. This would add $1.6 million to the budget. It would have an impact to the general fund.
Okay, so with this, we can refer to committee. So without objection on motion 23, that'll be referred to committee. That brings us to motion A.
Motion A and B actually could be taken together. Motion A would actually give instructions to your staff to go ahead and prepare the resolution for adoption of the budget, and also for the CAO, CLA, and City Attorney to make any necessary changes to correct the budget in any way. This would result in an ordinance coming back to the council next week for final adoption of the budget.
Okay, Mr. Cole, you sure you want us to vote on it? All right. So on this one, Mr. Krikorian, we will open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
15 ayes.
Mr. Krikorian, I want to. No, I thought we voted on both. No.
Yes.
Yes, we voted on both of them. Oh, so wait, we only have one on the computer. So technically, Mr. Clerk, are you telling me that we need to vote on B as well? Okay, so now we'll vote on B. Let's open the roll, close the roll, tabulate the vote.
15 ayes.
Mr. Krikorian, good job.
That's it. So, thank you. Well,
good job, good job, good job.
I'm sorry, members, that we didn't break our record for this hearing. We needed to get done in less than 2 hours. We didn't quite make it, but I do just seriously want to thank all of my colleagues on the council for tremendous work on this budget and on the past budgets that we've had to go through to get to this point. I especially want to thank the members of the Budget and Finance Committee who just week in and week out put in so much time, pay so much attention to detail in order to bring our city's our finances back to solvency. My Vice Chair, Mitchell Englander, and his lead staffer on budget, Nicole Bernson, Paul Koretz and his staffers, Kate Hennigan and David Hirsch, Mike Bonin and his staffer, Laura McLennan, and Bob Blumenfield and his staffer, Stephanie Magnian. And then, of course, in my office, there's the one and only Matt Hale, who has really been just been a tremendous expert on this budget and on process, and has really helped us along. My Chief of Staff, Irina Bernosian, and all of my staff in CD2 who've done such a great job in this. I also want to give a shout out for a moment to the former members of the Budget and Finance Committee who helped us along this path too. Bill Rosendahl and Tony Cardenas and Mr. Tom LaBonge, who have, in my time as chair, have also contributed to this path. And then my predecessor, of course, Bernard Parks, who saw us led this effort through some of the most difficult years that the city has ever faced. And really, we couldn't be where we are now without the leadership that he showed in budget and finance as well. Of course, we've always had the strong support of the council president and his staff, and I want to thank you, Mr. President, for the support that you've shown to the Budget and Finance Committee. to our mayor, Eric Garcetti, who has done such a magnificent job on this budget and prior budgets, and Deputy Mayor Rick Cole and the whole mayor's budget team. This has really been a great collaborative partnership, and I really couldn't be prouder of the work that we've done. Our CLA, Sharon So and Karen Kalfayan and Roy Morales and all of the folks at the CLA's office. You can't imagine the time that they put in on this budget, and it shows. Year in and year out, the attention to detail that the CLA's office puts into this is what makes the difference in our being able to demonstrate the priorities that the council has, and that's all dependent upon the work that the CLA does. And so thank you, Sharon and Karen and Roy and everybody at the CLA's office. Our CAO, Miguel Santana, of course, and his team, Ben Ceja, Jacob Wexler, Terry Sauer, and Delilah Puche, who have done, again, we're afloat today largely because of the effort and discipline that the CAO has brought our budgeting into this process. To our city clerk, Erica Pulst, who helps our meetings happen. To our council sergeants at arms who have allowed us to do this work, and to the folks at ITA who have helped so much with council audio and televising of these meetings. This has been a great team effort, and I really want to thank one and all for getting us to this day. And although we didn't quite make it within 2 hours, I think this has been the best budget that we've had, the best process that we've had, and I want to thank you one and all for helping to make that happen.
Thank you. You know, we really need to give Mr. Krikorian another round of applause. Paul, you've been the glue that has kept this together, and I think the people of the city of Los Angeles appreciate you. The people at the city, in city government, appreciate you, and Lord knows I do. But I also want to make sure we give a shout out to Andrew Westall of my office. Andrew, thank you. And I, too, want to thank Mr. Parks and Mr. Labange for their years of service. With that said, I'm going to defer to the Vice Chair, Mr. Englander.
Thank you. I want to stand and recognize Paul Krikorian on this, our Budget Chair, who has really done a phenomenal job. You've gone through and you mentioned everybody worthy of thanks, and it's a lot of people. It's an incredible teamwork, and you've led that team. And in fact, you've brought in new and efficient processes, and you've dialogued with everybody to create that. In fact, as the chair of this committee, you did something a couple years ago that you've maintained in bringing the budget advocates, our union partners, not to the podium but to the table. You've brought stakeholders that normally don't have a voice as well. You've given people opportunities to weigh in throughout the process, which is why at the end of this process it's such a great budget. And I want to thank you for that. I think we all truly appreciate not only your attention to detail, but the passion, the transparency, the ethical value that you bring to this process has really been truly unparalleled. And I, for one, thank you for that. And then one other group of people that I'd like to give a huge shout out to, and that to everybody you mentioned, all of their spouses at home, who, while we're in bed reading really fascinating information throughout the evening, every night throughout this process, and while they may be snoring next to us and we wake them up to say, wow, did you see what I found in the budget? They deserve a lot of gratitude as well, because they all put up with these long hours in this tedious process, evenings and weekends, and that goes to all of our families that have any input on this budget, because it's all done by them as well. And I really, truly appreciate their support. Thank you so much, Paul Krikorian.
All right, Mr. Tom Labange.
My last budget, I want to lay something on you. This is very important. May 20th or so, we start the budget. But I never was successful in getting an October 20th date just to focus on infrastructure. Have the port come into this table, have the airport come into this table, have all the departments with infrastructure, because 39 years goes by real fast. And you can't get everything you've done. But the teamwork that the administrators of the city do, the CAO and the CLA, are the structure. They're the coaches, and we try to score the points for the community. So I just lay that on you, Mr. Santana, Ms. So, and Mr. President, if on the 20th, 6 months from now, infrastructure only, because it gets away so fast, and because of the depletion of city forces over the times, there's sometimes a project that sits on someone's desk that's been empty for 6 months of the year. So it gets lost, and that hurts. Time is our biggest asset in being able to deliver for the people. So I just wanted to mention that as an idea, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Chairman of Public Works, the powerful Public Works Committee, Buscaino, and all of you, take that advantage, because it is so important to look at the whole year and find time to fight for your projects throughout the city, for the general part of the city, and also for your districts as well. And lastly, Mr. Krikorian, yes, you put an order to it. I like it the old days we had to fight for 8 votes. It was a long meeting. We'd go to 8 o'clock at night. But you could come out of this room knowing you got a position that you wanted to have. But I know there's more sanity in this process here and all the committee members. It's been a joy to work the process, because it does deliver for the people. And I know this is mostly a house of people from the City Hall here. The people do appreciate all what gets done in the sense that where they fight for something in their neighborhood. So I thank all the administrators and my colleagues for this process, and the taxpayers of the City of Los Angeles, and all the tourists of the City of Los Angeles, and all the people who went to the zoo to see the zoo lights and enjoyed it, because the councilman gave $100,000 to the zoo to help them get that done. Thank you for the children of Los Angeles.
Thank you. Let's give Mr. Tom LaBonge round of applause. And Tom, we thank you for the lights. There are children all over this city and others that what you've done helped bring a little happiness into their lives. Mr. Koretz?
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, everything's been said, as Xavier Slosky likes to say, but it hasn't been said by everybody. So I'll have to say it too. I think what was really unique about this process was how collaborative it was from start to end. The mayor didn't just put together a budget. The mayor worked with all of us, worked with the community, came up with the best mayor's budget I've seen since I've been here at least, and probably since I've been watching this whole process. Then we went through and found a lot of little places where we could help it a little bit. The CLA did great work and helped us find some money and helped guide us through this process. It was probably the best run budget process I've seen, and kudos to Mr. Krikorian, who I think I actually encouraged when the council president was looking for a new budget chair. That there was one person on the council that was smart enough and detailed oriented enough and would be the perfect budget chair, and it's this guy here who has done an amazing job. I think we all work together, and this is a great work product, and it is setting us back on the path to once again becoming the great service providing city that we know we can be. So I thank everybody. This was just an amazing process.
Thank you. Mr. O'Farrell?
Thank you, Mr. Wesson. I just wanted to rise because what Tom did not mention is that his discretionary investment in zoo lights resulted in $1 million of revenue for the zoo. That's what he neglected to say. So sometimes when you choose a little pot of discretionary funds and you invest it, it can reap benefits not just for enjoyment, but real monies for the city of Los Angeles. So I just wanted to point that out. Tom deserves a huge round of applause for that, for all of his work at the zoo. Yes. And then let me also thank our incredible chair of Budget and Finance, Paul Krikorian, and the entire committee for doing this. We are on the road to recovery, and it's because of the diligence and the hard work of that committee and the rest of us to support that. So congratulations.
All right. So I do want to thank the mayor and the mayor's office. Rick, you guys do a good job. We work well with the mayor. And mayor, wherever you are, you can stay a couple extra days. I appreciate being acting mayor. With that said, There's no further business before this body. We are adjourned.
You're watching LA City View, Channel 35.